Hello everyone and welcome to a review. Today we're going to be reviewing the 2011 comedy film Bridesmaids. So the cast is Kristen Wiig as Annie, Maya Rudolph as Lillian, Rose Byrne as Helen, Wendy McClendon-Covey as Rita, Ella Kemper as Becca, Melissa McCarthy as Megan, Chris O'Dowd as the police officer, Matt Lucas as Jill, Rebel Wilson as Bryn, and you've got a small role for Terry Crews, who plays a boot camp instructor. Right, let's get into the plot. When Annie Walker's best friend Lillian gets engaged, she must fulfill her role as maid of honour while dealing with her unsatisfying relationship and conflict with Helen, another bridesmaid. So, the standing performances. So usually I would normally do this from my favourite standing performance to not my least favourite, but something that didn't strike as much with me. Still a good performance that's above average, that's worth mentioning. Just maybe less so than possibly other members of the cast. Ben Falcone as Marshall John, he does good at playing like the straight man role, the one who is being opposed to everything that Melissa McCarthy is doing. And it's like a little bit of a comedy relief at the end where, you know, him and Melissa McCarthy at the post credit scene have it's like the big sandwich where they're in the bed and Melissa McCarthy's eating the sandwich off his body and all that. You know, he does really well. Obviously Melissa McCarthy's being the funny person again, so I guess he is kind of playing a straight person, but it was obviously he's a bit less standoffish. He's very welcoming for it with how he behaves. He's not so much of a denier. He's entertaining the weird and crazy antics of Megan. Compared to what we've seen in previous scenes, like on the aeroplane, with Megan's sexual advances and Megan's insistence on John being an air marshal, which obviously he is, but he is denying. And then obviously you get the end scene where he's flipped on his head and he's like going along with every crazy thing she wants to do. And obviously matching her at the same frequency. So that was nice to see. That was hilarious. Just to get that change. It was very unexpected. Rose Byrne as Helen. She was absolutely brilliant. She's not really there for the comedy. She's really there to be a foil for Annie. And of course, obviously, we're supposed to hate her as viewers. But she does really good at like portraying the really high life, snobbish, rich person as well. Where she's got all the dresses, she's got the contacts, she's got the money. On top of that, she gets away with every single nefarious act, pretty much, that she committed on Annie. Which obviously makes you double hate her. Of course, we get the redemption of that, but, you know, still, up until that point, you still hate her. And you hate her exponentially. Yeah, Rose does a really good job of this. Obviously, she plays the bad side of the character really well, but when everything starts to unfold and you see, like, the cracks between the image of the character with her family and the way her stepkids treat her, she doesn't have a good relationship with her husband, and etc., etc. And obviously then you see her crying in the car with Annie. Not only is it a crowd pleaser for the audience, who obviously wants Helen to get her comeuppance, but as well, on top of that, it's just a great performance to see, like, switching in between these very two different character traits. Very good from her. Ellen's character and the way she commits these acts is also written very, very interestingly. Because it's written so subtly that Ellen is obviously pulling and pulling and pulling at Annie, but it's done in a way that it's not obvious to everybody else surrounding those two. It's like Helen knows what to say and do just at the right time. That doesn't cause attention to her, that doesn't make her look like the bad guy, but causes Annie to react on a big scale, publicly, freaking out, causing all these bad issues for the group. And it seems like Annie is the bad guy rather than Helen, which of course makes us feel sorry for Annie, but also absolutely despise Helen as well. And the little parts where she does have comedy, like with the scene where she co-performed a song with Annie, she absolutely kills, where she's obviously singing to Lillian and they're trying to one-up each other, like that whole scene at the engagement party. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And also within that scene as well, she says, you know, to console her housekeeper to turn off the mics. She obviously tries to shun Annie off stage and all that. So yeah, those little parts that she does have of comedy, she absolutely nails. I think for the first half, Wendy McClendon-Covey's character, Rita, she has some absolutely brilliant lines, some absolute corkers. She's such a great performer. She's got that deadpan dry delivery, and she has this sort of raw energy about her that I can't describe. It's almost like she's delivering her jokes as if she's doing like a drama role, but obviously it's not, it's a comedy film. So not only do you laugh at exactly what she's saying, but you're also laughing at the way she says it and with the intensity she does it at. She's clearly an actor who obviously knows her craft, and it's very evident
in this film. For the first time not too long ago, I actually found out that most of her lines were improvised. I'm not sure how much is scripted, how much of it is improv, but I know a good portion of her scenes that I've personally watched, including the scene, which I think is her funniest scene, where she says that she's surprised that she's not enveloping bar stools because of what her children have done to her vagina. That is all improvised. That she is just such a great mind. Super, super talented.
And unfortunately, in this film, I would love to see more of Rita, but she kind of disappears after the first half, which is a bit upsetting. But she just doesn't get enough time. Whereas Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig get the whole movie, she only gets half, so there's only so much you could do. And even then, she doesn't get that many spotlight scenes. I think there's only like 4, maybe 5, maybe 6. It could be a little bit more, but it's still not enough compared to these guys.
And that's not only just in the second half of the movie, where obviously Wendy's character is less present, but that's up until the point that she is present the most, up until halfway through the movie, that Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy's characters get more airtime. So it's just a case of there's just no room for her, which is a real shame, because I think she has a lot to give. But still, those moments that she was there, they were memorable, so, you know, that is something to fondly look upon this movie. That being said, during her time within the first half of the movie, compared to Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy's time, like, I would still put Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig over her. I just think as comedy performances and just the jokes themselves and the situations themselves that were orientated around them were just more funnier. Perhaps she would have been a bigger candidate if she was in the film more, of course, but I probably would still lean on having Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy above her. Just because they made me laugh the hardest and the strongest, which obviously would be difficult to top.
Let's get into Melissa McCarthy as Megan and Kristen Wiig as Annie. I'm going to do these both together, mainly because it's hard to separate them because I just love them so much
in this movie.
Very different characters. I want to try and focus on Melissa McCarthy for a minute and her character. Melissa McCarthy just has this gift where she can make anything funny, and she just with a single expression, a single look. And in this movie, she just does that, and I feel like there's definitely some extra credit to be deserved when it comes to Melissa McCarthy in this film over Kristen Wiig, because a single look from Kristen Wiig doesn't make me laugh. A single look from Melissa McCarthy makes me laugh. Add that on top of the material that they get in this film, and how they deliver it, and how they use it. I know it's all plethored out. Melissa McCarthy might get the edge, but it's tough because although that is the case, Kristen Wiig definitely made me laugh harder. It's tough, and maybe it's because I'm a fan of Melissa McCarthy. I've been following her work for years. Fortunately, it's a bit shit now. She's sort of had the Adam Sandler effect where she's just teetered off over the years. But this is probably my favourite role she's ever been in. Megan's character is just made for Melissa McCarthy. It really is. This character is overly sexual, very impulsive, high-octane energy,
very socially inept, peculiar, zero boundaries, unpredictable. And when it comes to playing these characters, she is one of the best. It's the type of character we've seen her play over and over again, but I think this one is particularly special because there was a scene where Megan, Melissa McCarthy's character, is having a talk with Annie, Kristen Wiig's character, when Annie has had a fallout with Maya Rudolph's character Lillian, obviously Annie's best friend in the film. And not only does she give one of the most gripping and most heartfelt performances of the movie, but she shares a dialogue within it where she talks about how difficult life was in high school for her and how badly she was bullied and how that motivated her and gave her a sort of unbreakable resiliency to not feel sorry for herself, not getting defeated and sad when times are hard. But it motivated her to find a purpose in her life, to knuckle down, to study, to get a really high paid job like she has, obviously, when the movie takes place. She didn't see it as the end, she saw it as a new beginning. Obviously, she delivers the monologue to Kristen Wiig's character because Kristen Wiig's feeling sorry for herself and she's basically trying to motivate her to try and get that fight out of Kristen Wiig, just like Megan got the fight out of herself when she was going through a rough time. So she wants to have the same reaction from Kristen Wiig as she had for herself. And not only is this scene particularly good, because you get in essence, a origin story to this character who's a lot more than just a clown. The reason that she acts the way she does and the way she is because of her upbringing as a child and her experiences as a child too. For example, obviously, like I was saying before, she's got the trait of being quite socially inept. You could argue that's because of not having a lot of friends in school and etc etc. So credit to the writers for adding layers upon this character, making her more than just a one-note comedy relief character. But also credit to the writers and Melissa McCarthy for the delivery of the monologue that she has about describing what happened to her in school and all that, and the way she delivers her performance is so touching. I always say a rule with comedy is that if you're going to have the happiness, if you're going to have the laughs, you got to have the tears too. You got to have the sadness in comedy, because then you are setting a realistic reality within that world you've created. And a lot of people, especially me, can definitely relate a lot more when there is a lot more serious stuff, and there is those emotional parts, there is those serious parts to characters, to scenes, to a movie that make you feel closer to them on a human level, because we get a faithful reflection of the ups and downs of life. And Megan is definitely one of those characters for me who inhabits that notion. But from the comedy side and that impulsivity, the lack of self-awareness and the social ineptness, you've got some good, hilarious scenes with Melissa McCarthy's character. There's the part at the beginning of the film where she mistakes a man smoking a pipe in a suit as Kristen Wiig's husband. And she goes, "I'm glad he's single, I'm going to climb him like a tree." You have the scene where they're at the dinner table in the restaurant and Megan suggests that they do a female fight club and beat the shit out of Lillian, obviously the bride in the film. You have the scene with her and Marshall John, obviously Marshall John being Ben Falcone, Melissa McCarthy's real life husband. And she has a full scene where she's just hitting on Marshall John, where Melissa McCarthy puts her leg up in the little corridor that leads to the toilet on the airplane, and she goes, "You feel that? That's my undercarriage." Just some absolutely hysterical scenes. And might I add as well that, speaking of improv scenes in this film, a lot of these were also improv. The scene where she does the undercarriage scene, I know for a fact, is improv. And there was a lot of bloopers that came from that as well between the two. Not that exact scene, but another scene on the aeroplane with Megan and Marshall John, which was just so good. Melissa McCarthy, by the way, another hugely, immensely talented comedy actor who is absolutely just sensational at improv. And despite all of her success, I think she's very underrated in that regard too. And this movie obviously showcases that throughout.
I can't sing the praises of her in this film enough. But then we get to Kristen Wiig. The reason why she's so funny in this film is because of the rivalry with Helen and the extent that they both go to try and be the favourite or the best friend for Lillian. That's what creates the funniest moments. The scene with her and Helen on the stage, it's the engagement party. And they're both on stage and they're both paying compliments, and they're trying to outdo each other by giving compliments to the bride and groom, but also
doting on her the most.
I'm not going to go into the full scene, but it's just a great example of slow, methodical type of comedy. And then what you want to do at the end is have a big finish. And when they start singing together, like a really sentimental, beautiful song to Lillian, it fucking killed me.
It's the competitive nature. Is there anything you can do, I can do better? And how the extent rises and rises throughout the scene of where and how far they will go just to assert themselves in that position by Lillian's side. It's hilarious. The fact that Helen says that she went to Thailand with her husband and she learned a saying, and then obviously she speaks Thai to Lillian, and Helen translates it to, "You're a part of me and a part of me I can't live without." Because she does that, Annie, Kristen Wiig's character, has to go up and sort of blag a Spanish saying which isn't even Spanish, because she doesn't want to be anything less than what Helen is. And she just talks complete and utter just gibberish, which makes it so funny. You also get as well during the scene where Helen's talking about the Taiwan trip, where Megan, Melissa McCarthy's character, is just looking very passionately and nodding as if she knows what's being said, which is all the more hilarious. It's extra funny as well because Helen mentions to her housekeeper, Consuelo, to turn the mics off before Annie comes and grabs the mic off Helen and says, "Don't you dare," to Consuelo. Then within the Spanish monologue where she's saying all these what sound like Spanish words, she also says Consuelo in it. And that's at the point where you see Melissa McCarthy's face and she's very clearly moved, even though it's all completely made up, and you'd have to assume it's broken Spanish or some words are not even Spanish at all, etc., etc. And then obviously the scene caps off as well with Annie singing her heart out to Lillian, and obviously that's when Helen comes in and starts joining in the song with her and they're trying to top each other with the notes and stuff. Oh, it's such a great scene.
There was that scene, the scene on the plane where she's drunk and she's
being drugged by Helen with the sedatives, which obviously Helen concedes them as something to help her with her anxiety while she's feeling anxious while flying.
She's drunk, she doesn't know what she's doing.
It's just the jokes in the quick succession. I mean, what? In a 2-minute instance, you've got Annie being drugged, Annie coming into first class, Annie singing a southern song to Lillian, the steward coming over and saying that she has to go back to her seat in economy, and her saying hello grandpa in an old man voice. She then does a Hitler impression and saying that it's like Nazi Germany because of, you know, him controlling her, with the quote, "Welcome to Germany, auf Wiedersehen, asshole." She then turns around, opens the curtain that connects economy and first class together, and she says this should be open all the time because this is civil rights. This is the 90s. And the steward playing it so straight, going, okay, wrong decade, to her putting sunglasses on and using that as an attempted disguise to sneak into first class and stay in first class. Her then getting caught, her trying to play it off that she's with the passenger next to her, who she assumes is a Spanish man, and says that she is Mrs. Iglesias. The steward saying that, no, you were just here, you're just wearing sunglasses now, and that she has to leave, and then she's saying, I don't want to. Then Helen coming over and saying that everyone should experience first class once, Annie shouldn't miss out just because she can't afford it, she can have my seat. And then the stewardess then saying, I'm sorry ma'am, I'm afraid we can't do that. And then Annie doing the watching you eyes with her index finger and a middle finger pointing in her eyes and then pointing back at the stewardess saying that she's watching her. Just a compounded sequence of joke after joke where the jokes get better and the scene gets funnier and funnier and funnier. And for example, that line where she says about the curtains that they should be open because it's civil rights and it's the 90s, it was just so, I don't know why, it was just so hilarious to me. So the fact that it just, I mean, for obvious reasons, it just didn't make any sense. It doesn't, the two don't coincide with each other, and the fact that the steward played it so straight afterwards, I just couldn't control myself. It was hysterical.
You know, there's that part of her, and obviously her relationship with Chris O'Dowd, I think she does really well there. They sort of play off each other well.
They clearly have a lot of chemistry, and obviously you're just hoping that they get together by the end of the film.
Acting performance is bad. Honestly, I couldn't give you one. I genuinely could not give you one single bad performance from this movie. I think everyone, with the roles they were given, delivered. And they delivered it brilliantly. Right, so let's get into the lights of this. So you've got the two plot points, which is the love story with Chris O'Dowd and then the story with Helen, of course, the rivalry with Helen. And for what it is, there are some issues, and I'll get into them later. This is mostly for the Chris O'Dowd story, but it's simplest form, it works. There's definitely chemistry between Chris O'Dowd and Kristen Wiig. You know, they've got some little nice friendly banter and all that type of stuff, but in terms of really what cements them together as a strong couple, nothing really. Still, you know, you kind of root for them because they've got a very similar type of energy about them, so they kind of work in that regard. In terms of just the way that they're very chipper and the way they just converse. Very similar to each other, so it works there. But let's just say it's not perfect. Now, what is, I would say, less flawed or more perfect is the rivalry with Helen. I think it's written out so perfectly. I've mentioned, obviously, a lot of the other stuff before of why, you know, in terms of all these different scenes with them and them two trying to be the best friend of Lillian and the way Helen manipulates Annie and she makes the rest of the bridesmaids hate her. All that type of stuff is done really well, and at the end as well, obviously, when Annie gets her vengeance, that is even better. It's very
cathartic.
So another like of mine is the pacing and the juggling of events. The events being, you've got the plot with Rita and Becca, which I guess ends halfway through, but, you know, still. I mean, it does happen simultaneously with the plot with Chris O'Dowd and the rivalry, so that's 3 plots to balance in there, and they do it pretty well. They give the right amount of time for the Becca and Rita thing, mainly because it's at face value and it's pretty one note. Another like in this film is obviously the comedy. I mean, if I didn't like the comedy, then I wouldn't like the film. The comedy is really good. Now, I'm not going to say the film is a laugh a minute in the sense that every single moment is joke after joke after joke after joke. It's not that. The film does really well at balancing.
If it's not telling jokes, it's creating groundwork to set up further jokes. With its characters, its situation, its building of events, location, setting, story, which in my opinion all good comedies do. Like in this film, when the film finally builds to a joke, it has all these establishments for the joke that make it that little bit extra funnier, which makes the jokes hit better and last longer. So you always feel satisfied in that way. Also, you've just got interesting things surrounding the jokes. The characters are interesting, the story's interesting, so you've always got something to focus on, and they really handle that very, very well.
This is not between the events of like 2 or 3 minutes. You know what I mean? There's still quite a lot of jokes. While we're on the subject of the humour, I'm going to run through some of my favourite jokes. So, the funniest scenes of this film, you've got Rita saying that she's surprised she doesn't envelop a stool when she sits down because her vagina has been enlarged because of her kids. Hilarious. Megan uncontrollably laughing because she's put a firearm in her brother Doug's case when him and Lillian are going on the honeymoon after the wedding. Hilarious. Megan calling her brother an asshole. In the scene where they're in the restaurant planning on what they're going to do for the shower, the Bridesmaids shower, which was hilarious. Just unnecessary, but that's why it's funny. Of course, the scene with Helen and Annie in the engagement party. And the reason why it's so funny in particular is because Helen obviously delivers this speech in Thai and she translates it and it's like all wholesome and nice. And after it, Helen goes, oh, Consuela, could you turn the microphones off, please?
Then when obviously Annie does her part, where she obviously says that her and Lillian talk Spanish together, you actually hear Annie say Consuela in her dialogue. And the fact that she's saying it to Lillian, obviously trying to say how much she means to Annie, just like Helen said to Lillian how much she means to her. Obviously that is now completely fallen apart because of it, and it's all the more hilarious because of it. One of my favourite scenes within the movie.
You've got the scene on the plane where Helen says to Annie, oh yeah, I can give you something to help with your flight nerves. That whole scene, it's so hysterical. I would have to say it's my favourite, no doubt.
Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of scenes that are close, but that one, oh man, it absolutely floored me, and every single time I watch it, it still floors me in the same way each time. You've got the scenes with Megan too, where I've obviously mentioned this before, but she says to who she mistakens as Annie's husband and says, I'm glad he's single, I'm going to climb up like a tree. And the undercarriage part to Marshall John, obviously on the plane, great stuff. I mean, they're not really jokes, but like when Megan looks emotionally over at Annie when Annie's doing the speech in Spanish at the engagement party, and when Annie's having the freak out and splashing the chocolate fountain on the floor and pushes it over, essentially going crazy and babbling about Helen and her perfect life, obviously because the location of that scene is at Ellen's house and obviously it's so perfect and blah blah blah. She just has a look where it makes me laugh so much because it's meant to be an eye-opening scene. It's meant to be a scene that if you were there, if you're a guest at that party, it's eyebrow raising, it's shocking. But Megan is looking as if Annie has just made an emotional testament to the bride and groom or something. You also have the scene in the restaurant where Megan suggests that they do female fight club and beat the shit out of Lillian. Hilarious. That's about it for the jokes. Let's move on.
Let's get into the issues in this movie. So what bothers me is that Rita and Becca's plot is unresolved. They are introduced in the first half of the movie and they're not exactly prevalent, but they're in the mix of the characters in the movie, and then halfway they just stop becoming characters and they're resolved into background roles basically. And I think the issue is that what the film does to resolve these two's plots, of course, Rita's being that she has issues with her kids and respect and being an authority figure and them not caring about her treating her nicely. You've got her husband where she has a boring sex life, they have no connection, it's just all sex and no conversation, no hearts to hearts.
It's all soulless.
Hates her life in general, boring, stuck in the house all the time, whatever. And then you've got Becca, same, quite a vanilla relationship, vanilla husband.
Where she wants to be adventurous in the bedroom, he doesn't. He's kind of a prude, she isn't.
She doesn't like her life. What happens is, there's multiple conversations reiterating those three themes. Well, I guess three themes to Rita and two themes for Becca over and over again. And it's driven into our minds. And the way they sort of justify the whole thing is they just become lesbian. That they just kiss at the end. They kiss it in the middle of the film and then by the end of the film, they're pretty much together as a couple.
Well, seemingly at least. I mean, obviously we don't get to see them actually have a scene together. Obviously they're in background roles, but when they are in background roles, they are near each other, they are together. They're not holding hands, but they're near each other. So it's kind of open-ended, but I'm just going to assume that they are together. I don't know.
It's strange the fact that, well, for one, they've never teased it. They've never hinted at them being lesbians. So I don't understand how you go from having conversations about certain things to changing sexuality.
Or if they were lesbians then, but they just, I guess, didn't want to admit it, or didn't want to accept it, whatever. And when they found each other, it sort of just came to the surface. Then, obviously, you have the problem of, well, still, you've opened up those other issues and then you've not solved them, so... Like, whatever the reason is for them two being lesbians, at least in Rita's case, her issues are not solved.
Especially in Rita's case with her kids. I mean, there's still the issues with the kids. She's still going to have to be in her life. She's still going to be their mum at the end of the day. The respect issue is still unresolved, ultimately. I guess in Becca's case, it is sort of more solved, depending how different her life changes. I mean, her life pretty much had issues with her husband and her sex life. That's kind of changed now because of this development. But still, it's never hinted at. There's ways you have to justify it, there's ways you have to tell us that this is going to happen, foreshadow it, but there never really is. It really just is just two girls having a chat about the issues in their lives to changing sexuality in just a flash. It's strange. I just wish there was more, and I think what they could have done easily, I mean, you can't really resolve Rita's plot with her kids. Well, maybe one scene, but not one line of dialogue. But one line of dialogue you can use both the characters is like, I'm lying to myself because I've actually married my husband, but really, I'm not even that into guys. Whatever, just do something like that. And then you've got the full link. And then you can make the leap from, them being straight to them being gay. In the case of Rita and her kids, that's probably going to take a scene. You want to do it again in the middle, maybe after they go back from Vegas. It probably would look unnatural because just of the pace of the film and the tone of the film. But I don't know, do something where somehow they come round. I don't know what it is. Even if it's just something as simple as Rita just putting her foot down majorly, not shouting, not screaming, not losing it with them, just really laying down the law that she won't take this shit anymore from them. Something like that.
You don't really need to have anything with the respective husbands of the two. I think if you just nail it down that the two girls are together, then that's pretty much all you need. You can even have it in passing dialogue that, oh yeah, I said this to my husband, I told him that we're together, and he said this, I said that, whatever. Just have a little touch on it, but you don't really need a scene. But at the same time, that's still not really necessary.
It goes to show, though, just how strong characters they are when they're obviously in a handful of scenes together. Great chemistry. That great polar opposite energy that just complements each other's different sensibilities nicely. You could probably justify like a sequel or a spin-off of some kind just with these two alone. I've not mentioned it that much, but I really did enjoy these two in this movie. They were absolutely brilliant. Becca being this over positive shut-in, and then you've got Rita being this loudmouth whirlwind who says anything and has no filter. It's a brilliant combination. I just wish there was more of these characters. I really do. But it's a shame. Another issue is Annie and Lillian's relationship being tumultuous and nonsensical at times. Lillian seems kind of everywhere in regards to Annie. When Annie gets them all kicked off the plane, she is aware Helen gives her some pills, but blames the victim rather than the perpetrator. And doesn't even address Helen or even speak to her in a scene or anything like that. She addresses it in the sense that, oh, what the hell did you give her? But that's pretty much where it goes. And then she blames Annie for getting them kicked off the plane. If she was drugged, then it's not Annie's fault, is it? There's also a scene as well where Lillian says that the wedding has been so difficult without her, like the planning of the wedding has been so difficult without her. But yet when Annie's left her some like messages, voicemails, and called her multiple times, she doesn't answer, she doesn't reply, she doesn't get back to her. So how, if Annie's that important to you that you would need her to plan your wedding, you need her in your life because she's like, your closest right-hand woman, then why not answer her calls? Why leave her in the dust? Also, Lillian actively made the choice to go with Helen as her wedding planner. If she didn't want Helen being the wedding planner and wanted Annie's help, then why choose Helen? We've got a scene with Helen and Annie, and they're in the bridesmaids shop trying on outfits, and they all get food poisoning from the restaurant, and Helen sadistically watches Annie eat a mint that Helen passes her. Like, when Annie is, like, clearly suffering from, like, she's sweating, she's looking very blotchy in her face, she's white as a sheet, obviously very ill from food poisoning.
From the restaurant that Annie recommended.
And it's very obvious that Helen knows that. But she does it anyway in a very sadistic way. Again, I use that word sadistically. She watches and takes pleasure in Annie eating that mint, making her pain and suffering worse than what it is.
Don't get me wrong, I understand that these two are in a battle with one another, they obviously don't like each other. But still, I do think there's a line, and arguably it nearly goes to a point of no return, just because of the pleasure that Helen gets out of Annie's suffering. I don't know what you're thinking. Obviously, if Helen recoils, then obviously that's kind of the rivalry over, because she's showing empathy for Annie. But at the same time, just don't have the scene, you know what I mean? Just don't have the scene in the film.
After that happens, she becomes vulnerable, and she becomes, like, in a state, looking really pathetic. But then after that, everything goes right for her. She hosts the wedding event, and everything goes smoothly. She gets Lillian and Annie's favourite childhood band to sing their favourite song live at the event, and everything goes smoothly. It's like, my God, like, talk about
having no justice for the bad guy. So to everybody else, Annie's still in the wrong. Annie caused all these different types of issues, and Helen is an angel. She doesn't get brought down, Annie doesn't get vindicated, nobody turns on Helen, and they don't look down on her. Ellen's image is still intact, but Annie's is in tatters. And also, Ellen does one of the most thoughtful things for Lillian as well, bringing their childhood favourite band to sing their favourite song. And by the way, this song, Annie and Lillian have been singing throughout the movie in multiple different scenes. Like, there's nothing that Annie can do as a best friend of Lillian to compete with what Helen has just done. To be fair, I think all this is arranged before Helen and Annie patch things up. But still, it's one of those things that you shouldn't include in the movie because it just looks like one big fuck you to Annie, one big last fuck you to Annie. Helen 100% needed to be exposed. And we need an apology from Lillian. And if you want to keep the same ending, if you want to keep everything the same, but add that little part of levelling out Helen, do it in a very bittersweet way.
You've also got Annie's Cake Baby cupcake place being closed down, which serve essentially as the backstory for her entire character, while remaining to be her entire passion to motivate her throughout the hardships she faces within the film as a whole. Whether she's making cakes for herself when she's depressed, while looking at the newspaper print of the opening of it, with her fondly smiling at the front, remembering the better days. Obviously, Rhodes, the police officer, Chris O'Dowd's character, being a fan of her cupcakes, her coming around making him cakes, leaving them outside of his house in an attempt to win him back due to him loving the cakes, and her getting the same warm feeling about him that she had at the store. Even when she's with the sleaze bag at the beginning of the movie and she's walking down the street after sleeping around his house, you see her look at the cake shop. You also see it with Lillian. It's a theme throughout. And to me, and I'm pretty sure to a lot of people, it'd be a thing of, well, what made her happy was having that cake shop, and for one reason or another it didn't work out, and she had to close it down, and ever since then her life has not been that great. But by the end of the film,
she has another cake shop and everything is resolved.
And for some reason it's just not. It's explored, it's reiterated, it's commonly incorporated into the film, but she never actually does anything with it. She never opens a cake shop. It's something that she hangs on to, but she doesn't do anything with it at the end, and the film just completely neglects it by the end of the film, and you're wondering why. Yeah, I mean, some 25 minutes before the end of the film, she delivers the cake to Chris O'Dowd to try and win him back, and it gets eaten by cats, and then that's it. That's it when it comes to that arc. The cake as a whole, it's never mentioned, never hinted at, never talked about. It's not present anywhere
after that,
which is so strange. So strange. I thought maybe lack of time. That's why they didn't do it, but
that's just me grasping at straws for a poor conclusion to an arc, or lack thereof, I guess.
While we're on the subject of the whole cake shop thing, so Chris O'Dowd's character sleeps with Annie, and the next morning he surprises her with ingredients to make a cake. and he's basically trying to do it
as a nice gesture.
Sees how happy it makes her.
He used to go to her cake shop, so he knows how good it is, he knows how good she is at it, and he knows that she's meant for it.
But then she says that she's moved on with that part of her life and she doesn't want to do it anymore, and she kind of leaves and gets visibly creeped out, which I kind of understand. It is a bit weird.
Considering the fact that they barely know each other, it may come across to her that he's obsessive in a weird way. But then again, later on, like I said, she does make the cakes for him and she tries to patch things up with him, so I guess she saw past that and she saw it as a act of kindness rather than an act of creepiness.
Also, what doesn't make sense is her behaviour and motivation in that scene. If she doesn't have any part of her that wants to make cakes and enjoy that part of her life, then why does she look at the newspaper printing and make cakes for herself when she's upset? The cake theme for her is very prevalent in her life. It's
something that has never left her. No, you could argue maybe she's in denial, but if she was in denial, the movie would have told us at the end, because she would have realised that this is what she wants to do and therefore open up a new bakery shop or do something, in that industry.
Right, let's get into my conclusion. So, like I've said, this film is one of my favourites. I go back to this film at least once a year.
Now, yeah, it's definitely flawed with its narrative structures, its character arcs, but its comedy is pretty much unbeatable. So in the area it lacks, the comedy redeems it. There's definitely comedy films with better narrative structures and character arcs, but there's not a lot of other films that have as great of comedy as this one does.
What makes this film just kill it in all regard is its cast.
Its relaxation towards the cast improvising, if they decide that they want to.
And it's absolutely phenomenal script. It keeps things moving. It has its flaws. There's some characters you'd like to see more. There's some things you'd like to see explained. There's some things that you wish weren't there.
Or were handled or done in a different way.
But really, at the end of the day, you're just there to laugh. And it depends on your own personal regard and your own personal feelings. I think one big turn-off would be Helen's character for a lot of people. And especially that scene with the food poisoning stuff. At least for me, that would be a big turn-off. But, one thing you can seek solace in is there is revenge in a way for Annie. She wins the long game, Everything that's happened to Annie, everything that Helen does, is all on the back page. What's on the other side of that page is her being a very lonely, very unloved person from her home family who doesn't see her husband a lot. And, that's kind of where she wins. Like, yeah, okay, you may have done all these things to me, you may have hurt me,
but I know I'm loved. I've got Rose, I've got my mum. And in a roundabout way, she's got Lillian too. That relationship is a little strained in the way everything is patched up. And the way that Lillian sort of victim blames Annie and all that is a little bit weird, but at the end of the day, they're still best friends. And in Lillian's own words, she wished she had Annie doing the wedding because Helen has blown out of proportion and took control.
And you can't really truly say that about your husband and his kids. So, there is that. So it balances itself there in a way, depending on the way you look at it. But this film, for me, is a classic. I think it's very underrated. I put this as one of my favourite comedy films of all time, and I think it doesn't get the praise it deserves from everything that it gets right. There's a lot of films that are
held to a high esteem that doesn't get right what Bridesmaids gets right. Now, of course, it gets some things wrong, but it does get a lot of things right.
And for that reason, as well as its amazing cast,
who envelop these characters and make them their own,
I would give this film
4 out of 5 stars.
There's a little bit of issues that stop it from getting 5, but there's nothing truly that can stop it from being one of the best comedy films out there. If you've never seen it, go and watch it. But with all said and done, that is the end of this review. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.